Intro. So yes, I'm Mike Burns. I'm Head of Service Delivery for the Information Digital Group at the University of Warwick. Until next Thursday, and then I'm on a Vogue career break. So I'll be leaving Warwick next week. I'm also involved in UCISA, which is the sector sort of collaboration group. So I've sat on the Support Services Group Committee for a number of years and the recently formed Business Relationship Management Group as well. So we've had some really good stuff coming up so far, and one of the things that is close to my heart. So I worked at Highlands and Islands University for just over 9 years in the north of Scotland, which is a very different type of institution to, for example, Warwick, which is a very research-heavy Russell University Group institution. And because of these contacts and conversations that we're having, what I'm discovering and we're seeing more and more of actually challenging the model of what education providers should be doing, trying to understand the digital skill set of our user base. And actually it's changing. So we've heard today about the digital native, for example, our staff base, our student base. And I believe all of this is now under challenge. And in service management, we have to think how we rise to that challenge. And I deliberately don't use the phrase IT service management. I haven't for a number of years. As Mark was alluding to, this is now an enterprise environment. So the holy grail, as far as I can see, is I'd love to understand the student journey from the point they make an inquiry into our institution to the point they graduate from that institution, and to really understand what's going on with them. You know, are they having financial difficulties that we haven't spotted, and actually maybe they're having problems with their studies because actually they're having library access problems or building access problems. And there's a whole wealth of data there that good service management can give us. Let's sort of forget GDPR at the moment and where that could potentially land us. But I think there is massive scope in all of this. And I think there is a way forward. But we really need to understand our users. And there's been some interesting developments. Now, I will not name names of institutions I've spoken to in a couple of the case studies, but I believe this is becoming more prevalent. It's actually going to challenge our thinking massively as well. So I will just work out how to change my PowerPoint and then we'll be fine. Okay. So the merging of the educational audiences and the delivery model. Now, this presentation is written partly for our non-sector participants today. So if you work in the sector, some of this is not going to be new. You'll have heard this before, but this is just our sort of baseline as to where we are. So classically in education, and this is very general broad brushstroke, there tends to be about 6 approaches to how our users go through their educational journey. Starting as children, we're in junior primary, we move into secondary and sixth form. You then have a possible divergence of further education and higher education, moving into research and then the alumni. And that in itself is challenging because that could potentially be 4, 5, 6 different types of educational institutes that we are familiar with over our period of study and our users have been brought up with. And this model is changing, whether we like it or not. The word tertiary keeps coming up, and this really affects who our users are and how we have to design our services, transition our services, understand what's coming up in the future. So the traditional model for those who are not in the sector, further education, generally a bit more vocational, generally 16-year-old upwards, more short courses, part-time courses, and it's a way to work up to degree level education if that's what they want to do, or if they want to do with the more vocational subjects, then absolutely. Traditional universities, higher education, generally 18-year-olds and upwards, courses may be taught research-based degree level education, predominantly on campus, though since COVID, the blended learning approach, which is a mixture of on campus and online, has definitely exploded. And students are much more likely to be national and international in those institutions, whereas in your traditional further education colleges, they're more likely to be local or national. I say that's just some broad brushstrokes for those who are with us today who don't have that understanding, because to be honest, I've worked in education for a while and it took me a year or two to get my head around this as well. So this term tertiary keeps coming up, and tertiary broadly means any education which takes place after high school. But what that's starting to mean in practice is where you've had a traditional college offering services and a traditional university offering services, you're now getting seamless delivery with merged institutions or single institutions who actually have responsibility for further and higher education. You might think, why does that matter? That matters because all of a sudden it starts changing your student life cycle. It starts changing the entry point of users into your system. Sorry. So it starts providing more challenges because actually your scope of service, your service catalog has to change and adapt. If you have a student who could potentially with you at a single institution for up to 10 years, that's a game changer from the traditional 3 to 4 in terms of what we can do and how we engage with the users to understand their skills and the technology that we need to offer. There is a couple of examples in the UK where an institution that is called a university actually has regional responsibility for post-16 education. So they're having to work with the high schools in the high schools to actually deliver education. And that then leads to safeguarding issues where you're working with regional authorities, etc., and how they have to work with those rules and regulations in terms of the technology they have to deliver. So the model is getting more holistic, and it now can be sort of broken down in some instances into just 3 or 4 institutions or 3 or 4 touch points with the education system, with tertiary being delivered potentially by a single supplier. And the concept of alumni, which is one that I think we all struggle with in HE institutions, if you're moving into an era of lifelong learning, then actually, what's the point of alumni? Maybe everyone becomes lifelong learners, and that starts changing how we have to interact. So again, for those who are not from the sector with us today, alumni students will have a relationship with the institution they graduated from for potentially decades after they've left. Similarly, in a slightly different vein, but staff called emeritus staff might have a relationship with an institution that's not necessarily contractual, but they are affiliated to it. They can still access resources when they retire for years after they've left. So there's a very long period at which those relationships and actually the use of technology then exist between that user and that institution. So this tertiary effect is going to start affecting our service design transition, and how we then manage all that. Because like we're talking about, the life cycle of a student might now be 8 to 10 years. It's not just 4. So how do we bring them on the journey with us? If alumni as a concept is under challenge, we're moving to lifelong learning, then actually that starts getting into your design and your licensing and all that technical stuff going on behind the scenes. But the physical campuses have to start delivering a vastly wider range of digital skill sets under one roof, be it physical or digital, and people expect it to be seamless. Now, for any educational institute, we have specialisms, of course we do, but we also have to do provision across a really broad range of disciplines. And that in itself can be challenging. And Mark spoke about it earlier in terms of the technical challenges that can be provided by a research department needing to do their thing and another department needs to do their thing. And how does that cause tension with sort of unified, consolidated service management approaches where we've got good governance and good discipline? The wide range of demographics means our service catalogues are going to be changing. They've got to be much more agile, adaptable, much more fast working. We'll touch on digital transformation later. But the area that has really caught my attention is actually how big service providers that exist are actually making inroads with students at a junior level. They're in the primary schools, they're in the secondary schools, and that is now starting to have impact on university grad or university entrance because of how they're using the technology. So we're going to touch a little bit on the digital native side of this. So who are our customers and users in an educational institute? Well, they're vast. We have staff, we have students, we have research partners, but within those, there's a massive web and tree of different types of users. You can have the visitors, part-time, contractors, full-time, national, international. For research partners, you can have commercial, you can have industry, you can have public bodies, government, NHS, other institutions. And we have to find a way to allow that to all seamlessly work and to support that models as well, in a way that actually people find intuitive and easy to use. And again, Mark was talking about the sort of single access platform. And that's been something that we're seeing in the sector is happening more and more, because actually that big transformational bang to change systems into something that is a single system just isn't really going to happen that quickly. It's a very, very brave institution who's going to be able to do that because of all the legacy systems that exist. So there is no one size fits all at the moment with this, and we have to expect the unexpected. And part of the reactions that happen within traditional IT and wider enterprise professional services is those challenges will happen. You will get it bomb dropped on you Friday. Something needs to happen the following week for a research project or contractors coming in. Now, that's not unique to education. It happens in all industry, but there is a massive prevalence of this in education because of the very adaptable, flexible nature that the institutions are required to have in terms of projects and transformation that's going on just now. So there's a tension exists in this between the right for academic freedom and our desire to have digital consolidation. And I use the term digital deliberately. We've moved away from IT. We're in the enterprise service management. Digital is that utility like water and gas, and we just have to get on with it. And in a lot of ways, nobody knows we're there until it goes wrong, where they don't get what they want, and then all of a sudden they're shouting. So you have the requirements of regulatory, statutory, financial to deliver unified management, but this can create tension with academic staff who want that freedom to research, explore. Some of these academic staff may have been here 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They're there for their brain, they're there to deliver, they're there to teach, they're there to encourage learning, they're there to share their ideas and challenge, get people to challenge and debate and engage. And that doesn't necessarily gel well with the fact we want them to keep their digital skills up because they don't necessarily accept that that's the case. But that also applies to our professional services staff as well. Because of these demands, including digital freedom, we then sort of start having that battle between what do we want to do in service management to ensure we have good governance, good process, we understand our users, things are done in a structured, managed way. But we can't be seen to be stopping or restricting what's going on in the academic world. And a very good example of this is actually Cyber Essentials. So for those of you in the IT space, Cyber Essentials is actually a prerequisite now for research projects. If your institution does not have Cyber Essentials, you're being locked out of research funding opportunities. But when you're in a very siloized institution, where you have different departments who've been running IT their different way with shadow IT departments, the computer under the desk, that stops you getting that Cyber Essentials. At what point does the institution have to stand in and say, stop, we need to work this way because actually we're losing tens of millions of potential funding here. And that's sometimes a battle that senior management don't want to have with professionals and academics. Because if an academic's not happy and they want to lift their research and go to another institution, they can do that. And that instills a little bit of fear and tension in how we then start designing how we support this. But I think through good service design and good service transition, we can alleviate this tension point. And one of the key areas that's coming up is actually this emerging business engagement. So traditionally, we had service delivery managers. We've now got business engagement partners. There's various versions of that term. And this is more about now, we don't just deliver to the department saying, this is what you do. We have to engage, we have to explain. And actually, I think traditional IT departments with service management became this because they had their fingers in all the pies, they understood what was going on, and they can actually explain the tension. They're very good at joining up the dots in a way a lot of departments can't actually do at a university because there's usually always a touch point. In the same way that usually the best people to ask about who's getting paid is not payroll, but finance, because they're the ones who send the money out at the end of the month because the records aren't necessarily up to date. And there's a big issue with legacy systems across most institutions. So this understanding of our users, there was one particular university who were actually trying to secure funding from their university board. It was for some, I'm not going to say minor digital transformation, but not full scale. There was stuff they were being told by the students, the intake that needed to happen. But the management at that particular university, the university board, university court, they didn't understand what Gen Z was. They couldn't get it. So the IT department at that time actually had to go and arrange awareness sessions as to what was Gen Z and get senior management onto these so that the hierarchy could start to understand where these digital natives, the Gen Zs, were coming from and what they were expecting. Now, that was a big cultural change because one of the things we'll touch on is actually who's driving who here. And I saw some of the comments earlier, institutions have their IT, but should their IT be flexible and digitally versatile in a way that our users are requiring, or is it it's you saying this is how it's going to work? And it's who holds that balance of power. And that in turn affects how we then design, transition, and manage our services. So this became quite a big thing at this university, but it showed that there was a lack of agility in their thinking, a lack of agility in their design, and a lack of agility in just understanding how fast changing this is. And I think in our first presentation today, we were talking about the digital natives who have grown up with the smart speakers and they've got their tablet and their phone all around them. There's still a generation, and I include myself in that, is that we still remember life just before that, but then there's people above me who actually they didn't even have the crossover. They came from one and they see technology as an evil, which again, I think we sort of touched on earlier on about how technology has become much more utility in what we do. So in an institution, they really need to think about what's their service offering and what did they have to do to get the digital teams to support strategy. But the strategy hadn't been decided because that hierarchy didn't understand who their users were that were coming through. So we touched on digital native earlier on as well. And I find this phrase quite challenging now, but it's taken me a while to get to this point because to me, it was the best phrase. But digital nativeness does not necessarily mean digital confidence or digital versatility. And this is the problem that I'm starting to see speaking to institutions that is starting to come through the ranks. And how we start to understand that is a challenge I don't have an answer for, but it is going to be a challenge for us. So we want simplicity of systems. We want consolidated platforms. As Mark said, we have legacy systems and legacy systems and legacy systems. Again, this happens all over, and we need to try and sort that mess out. But there's three persistent assumptions that I hear speaking to different institutions. Students are always assumed to be digitally native, and therefore that must mean they're digitally confident. I don't believe that's the case. Staff are always assumed to be continuing developing the digital skills. I know they're not. We all know they're not. And the sector participants today are probably nodding furiously at that statement. But there's also something within digital transformation as you get the senior leaders coming in, that every aspect of physical traditional services must be able to have a digital twin. And actually, there's not always a digital solution to this. And actually, we have to be a bit more aware and cognizant of how this works. And that comes back to that engagement through our service management process and understanding, really understanding what's going on with the customers. I mean, this is miles away from traditional customer service management. It's a completely new skill set. So we're trying to find the happy place between requirements and experience. So there is two, I think, diametrically opposed things going on in institutions, particularly the traditional higher education institutions. At that level, the institution is almost driven by the fear of the National Student Survey for the student experience and making sure the results on that are as good as possible. And I say that when I was managing a FE college IT department at one of my previous jobs, and this was the biggest thing, but it was a very small proportion in the overall context, and we couldn't validate a lot of what had been said in NNS, but it became this regular agenda item. What are we doing about these 8 complaints in NSS on a student base of 8,000 at that campus? But then within the sort of more traditional professional services technical space, we're getting incredibly reliant on Gartner for understanding benchmarking. Where should we be with our technology? But the Gartner system doesn't necessarily have the benchmarking for education. And is there a danger that we're actually benchmarking against the wrong places? Something that has cropped up again and again over the years in service management with various certification programs is actually how that benchmarking works. So this is the case study that basically brought this part to today's presentation. So for a number of years, there's been a very well-known service provider, and I mean incredibly well-known, this is a worldwide one, who made a very focused effort within the local authorities in a particular part of the country to get their software and hardware into this space. So this is getting it in with students who are 5, 6, providing out the hardware that's running their operating systems. Now, COVID, I think, has accelerated this, and I keep trying not to go back to COVID because I think we all just want to forget about it in some ways, but COVID did have an impact here. So what happened? This was quite a regional university, not an international university. So their intakes generally tended to be from a more local nature. They didn't have the international students, which is another problem in itself in terms of their understanding of technology. So their intake that came in, I think 24, 25, sorry, it should be 23, 24. One sec, 1 second. Sorry, that was a bit unprofessional. So anyway, so what happened? This was the first year that their intake, they noticed there was a difference here because this institution had actually been working with their local authorities very, very closely to understand what their roadmap was over the years. But what they found is this intake that's come in, this is the ones that have gone through that primary and that secondary approach. And the students, whilst digitally native, were not confident about using the systems in that institution because it was actually a different provider. It was different operating systems. And they actually had to triple the number of IT inductions they ran for this academic year to get them to understand Microsoft systems. Now, when we're in professional services, we understand that a bit more. That's part of our job. But here's a case where actually you've got the Gen Z digitally confident. Yes, they're surrounded by all technology, but they weren't digitally versatile. And all of a sudden, the institution is having to react to that. And this leads to the question, where should we be looking for our service design at educational institutions? Should we be actually looking down at the formative years to find out how they're coming up through an educational system? Similarly, should we be looking more at the international markets to understand how the education is going on to then inform our service design? So this was actually quite a shock to the institution. They got around it, which is fine. That's what they expected. But what it showed that even with that level of understanding and that level of engagement, the concept of digital versatility hadn't been understood because, and we saw it in today's first presentation, people know what they know when they like what they like. And that's actually something we have to deal with as well. But who is right here? Do institutions have to offer digital versatility to cater for all those we like what we like? Or does an educational institute have the right to say students need to use our systems? And in some of the comments I saw earlier on, I thought it was very interesting because, actually, are those systems a bit archaic? And is that because our staff, academic and professional, don't have that digital confidence to go and start learning new systems, understanding new systems, exploring the technology and the reasons for that? And I don't think we're in a place to provide the answer, but I think we're in the place to help facilitate that there is a wider issue here that needs to be done. So no one size fits all. This again is more for the non-education participants today, but just the type of people that we're trying to engage with. And how do we get to a unified enterprise service management approach that means all these different skill sets and requirements can all be catered for in a very simple manner? And the world of iconography and design is becoming quite an international language, which I think is another area that we really need to focus on, as in how we deliver services and people access our services. So how do we handle this in the sector? Well, JISC is a big one at the moment. So JISC is the UK Digital Data and Technology Agency focused on tertiary education, research and innovation. Most educational institutions at HE level, to a lesser extent FE level, are members of JISC, and it's very collaborative. But what we've spotted as we've started asking people more, JISC actually created a digital capabilities framework. And originally it was sort of set at staff development at institutions to actually try and understand how can we help people enhance their digital skills, their digital capabilities through some form of self-assessment, doing little tests and trying to get some training. And this has been delivered on a national level. But what we're starting to spot is this has now been used a bit more for student IT and digital capability tests as well. And again, for our non-sector participants today, actually a research person could be staff or student or both. And there's this whole boundary blurring going on as to how do we categorize our users. So the GIST digital capabilities framework was set for digital leaders and staff to help develop digital capability in organizations. But it's now starting to be issued out to students before they get to the institution so that we can start building up a degree of confidence in their digital skills before they arrive. So I've put a link in this when the slides go out. It's generally a good piece of work. It's worth a read. And they broke it into 6 particular sections. I've used it at both institutions that I've worked at, but I think it provides a really good background piece of information to explain what's actually going on in the sector and how we're trying to what are the skills that we're actually trying to get the generations to understand, and that there is a lot there. It's a very good piece of work. So within that one, how does this affect our approach to service management? This is where we start getting into this whole world of digital transformation, I think, and we're starting to see this happening at more and more institutions, particularly in the sort of legacy institutions, your Red Bricks, your Russell Group ones, who've got decades, if not hundreds of years of legacy. But the digital transformation to try and move to this more agile approach of working is sometimes a bit contradictory to how as traditional service management we've been used to working. If you look back to ITIL 2 in particular, ITIL 3 was a bit less straitjacketed. ITIL 4 is much better, in my opinion. But we have to adapt to that. And there's a lot of cultural barriers in people's heads who have grown up with a very traditional service management model with very rigid process, very rigid, workflows, timelines, nice, neatly planned projects. But as we move into an agile environment where, you're doing your sprints each week, you're trying to work through your backlogs, that we need to do that with good governance and the good understanding of service management. Agile's not replacing it, but service management has to adapt to agile because we need to keep up with this rate of change in technology. But that also impacts how we engage with our users. So we can be doing continual improvement, launching updates, but a student who started at the start of an academic year doesn't really want you to change that product until probably the end of the academic year. You might get away with it between semesters with a good bit of communication. But actually, they're quite a fickle audience. They don't want that type of change because they're in this mindset. There's a particular way they need to work. So there's another tension exists there between digital transformation and that agile approach, and our end users, ultimately the students, and how they engage with the services. And I've not yet found any institution who has managed to nail student engagement to the point they could get away with agile continuous development of key systems, because the student bodies are so disparate. They are a wide bank. So we no longer just deliver services and service delivery. We need to co-create and engage with the business, but we actually have to understand we're going to hold tension and we're going to actually challenge areas of the business who come up and say they want to do things a particular way because that's what they're used to. And I think we've ended up, it's an unenviable position, but in some ways it's a good position that what was traditional IT and service management has become this bigger enterprise service management approach to try and pull the businesses together and pull the institutions together as well. But how that means we then get involved in things like academic course development, we have to go right into the grassroots now to understand what's going on and how the academic staff are trying to work, and actually not be scared to say, have you tried it this way? Could you try it a different way? So my summary from all of this is we serve multiple audiences of multiple ages with multiple digital skills and multiple levels of understanding. We're multiple platforms and multiple providers with multiple risks and heavy burdens of legacy and responsibility. And you start multiplying all that up together and you're dealing with almost exponential variables. And it's a really, really difficult one for us to navigate and to manage. But we have to rise to that challenge of service management because we need that simpler one-stop shops. We need the knowledge, we need the data, because if not, we're not going to get into that world of AI and how that's going to help support our end user base. But also our users, our staff, our students need to come on those journeys as well. And that is big changes in actually somehow institutions engage with their staff and actually how they develop their staff and taking it seriously. I have seen, speaking to some institutions, the concept of the IT induction was wiped off as a cost saving and has now had to come back because they stopped doing that type of development. It was seen as a very easy target. But should students adapt to work the way educational institutes want to work? Or is it the institutes have to start adapting to how students and how our users are wanting to work? In a world of limited budgets, this is a very interesting question. Again, I saw somebody earlier on said something about they'd had a relation at an institute and they said they felt years behind in terms of the technology. So there needs to be some understanding of that and how we support that. How do we manage that? How do we deliver that holistic service as best we can? But no change is definitely not an option on this one from where I can see. So I hope you found that a little bit useful. I think there's something happening with our user base before they ever reach us, but it's actually impacting how we design, how we deliver, how we move forward with how we design, transition, manage our services in the future. So you can contact me on LinkedIn because I will not have a Warwick email address from next week. But if there's any questions, we'll no doubt grab them at the end. And I'm going to hand back over to Mark. Thank you very much.